Hi everyone, I am Dr. Jennifer of Strategic Strides Animal Chiropractic, and tonight I'm coming to you live with my interview with my own husband, Dr.
From
Shayne.
our living room!
Dr. Shayne Baylis, or I call him Shayne, and you can too, from ProAction Sports Injury Clinic. So you're probably, if you know me and you know him, you're probably wondering why I'd be doing an equestrian video with my husband, who is probably the #1 scaredest person around horses.
I thought I heard smartest.
No, scaredest, definitely scaredest. He's even scared around my 32 and 34-year-old horse, so if that gives you any idea.
Keep a safe social distance.
Anyways, so why is he here? So he is basically here tonight to talk with us about something that I feel as equestrians we kind of throw to the back burner when it should really be brought to the forefront: concussions. How many of you have fallen off your horse? How many of you have fallen off your horse more than once? How many of you have had to go to the hospital for one of your falls? Okay, so I'm sure I'm not alone with raising my hand for those questions. And that's why he is here, because one of his specialties that he actually has a big passion is treating concussions. It started out with his love for treating hockey players, which evolved into treating hockey players with concussions. And then I said, guess what? Did you know that like 45% of the equestrians who have injuries are concussions? So it's actually the leading cause of injury in our sport. And it puts us right up there with those who get concussions in football and in hockey and in rugby. We're right at that level, and we are a non-contact sport. So, you know, why are we getting these type of concussions?
Well, it is a contact sport when you fall off your horse.
I knew he was going to say that.
All right, so I know you guys think that there's no, contact in that. I kind of take it just like girls hockey, where they're like, it's a non-contact sport, but they get into it too, right? There's always that chance of falling into something. So
yes.
It definitely,
So the ground,
I think, is a contact sport when it comes down to it.
According to the research, we're not the same type of contact as football. However, like you said, we do have contact with something, hence why we get the concussion. And I do think that we need to take it more serious, because it can lead to a very serious health outcome for us. So I'm going to ask him a series of questions because I don't think people know, okay, so yeah, if I get a concussion, I'll go to the hospital, I'll get treated, but there's things you can do before you get the concussion. And that's why I'm bringing him along. So first I want to ask you, because most people, when I say, oh, my husband does concussions, they're like, oh, I thought he was a chiropractor. So how did you get to treating concussions? Like, what's your background?
Well, started really early on, and it was basically just the rest, right? It was like people come in like, well, you just need to rest and stay away from things, stay in the dark rooms and things, until later on, I was actually talking to a friend going, isn't there something more we can do? And he was like, yeah, there is more you can do. So, go take this course. It was called Shift Concussion Management course, with a guy named Dr. Scott Haller, who had done a lot of practicing with Pittsburgh University, which is Mickey Collins, guys who treated, the Pittsburgh Penguins, Sidney Crosby, those types of things. And so I took his course, and he started doing some eye movement treatments and testing those ways, which was, way beyond my scope at that time. It was really interesting, but he made it really simple so that we could navigate through those tests to help people out on a basic level. And then I started exploring more things. I did an R2P course with Dr. Van Nisserer, who's a physiotherapist here in Ottawa, and she did a great job of kind of giving us more in-depth kind of exam to help expand our examining. And then I had done other things with concussion workshops. I've done vestibular, introduction to vestibular problems, an advanced version as well. And I just kept on, taking more things that I could get involved with for concussions, so I could learn a little bit more. So basically, we've developed quite a bit more of treating concussions from a whiplash point of view, eye tracking point of view, balance, physical testing, exertion testing, where, Dr. Letty out of Buffalo University does a lot of autonomic nervous system testing, where it's basically, if your heart rate is going up, are you able to kind of maintain the proper levels without kind of exhausting yourself? So there's a lot of different systems that are involved with concussion. So I'm always learning more and more at each place I go to.
So one of the things that I've kind of talked to a lot of my clients about, especially when I'm working with their horses, because a lot of times it does come up, oh, I brought you out because my horse started bucking, they threw me off, and then we kind of get on this topic of, oh, did you get a concussion? Like, what are your symptoms and stuff like that. So then I start talking about the clinic, because not only does Shayne at the clinic work with concussions, but Dr. Lindsay, who also treats a lot of our equestrian riders, she does as well. But one of the things I don't think a lot of people realize is what you can do before you get a concussion, and that will actually help your treatment, is something called a baseline test. So tell them what a baseline concussion test is.
Well, we do baseline concussion tests so that we can see what the player was beforehand. I was even doing a recent course before, and they were, analyzing some of the people that had either concussion or just had kind of vestibular problems with dizziness. And they were talking about pre-existing vision problems. So some people have strabismus, which basically means the eyes aren't kind of lined up, or they have eyes that don't track properly. And you don't know this after they have the concussion, because it can be caused by concussion. So it's always good to know about this type of problems that they have prior to that, so we can get them either to an optometrist to help maybe correct their eyes, or at least know about saying they're going to be a little bit slow when they do this test. So when I send them back, I want to know what is their capabilities before that, and it does take into effect too of what kind of student they are, how well they read, those types of things. And we use a computer test called impact test to actually evaluate this. Along the lines, we also do a balance test. We do a reading test called King-Devick test, which is a good sideline test. So I do recommend trainers that are working with teams just to have baselines of a King-Devick test. So right after they kind of is suspected of having concussion, either during the play or practice, that they can analyze that as well. And we do take head check is another program that's been implemented mainly with the junior teams, but there's certain testing that they do there as well to help evaluate the players. There's like a pylon test and some other cognitive testing that we do incorporate into our testing, as well as the VOMS, which is the one out of kind of Pittsburgh University with Mickey Collins kind of developed it, which is basically eye tracking, reaction time, and your ability to kind of look at things while moving at the same time. So those things are basically incorporated into our baseline testing. And one of the really cool things that we do now is NeuroTracker, which is basically being able to see multiple targets moving around in kind of a depth perception. So they move back and forth and side to side, and how fast you are to pick them out. Maybe not so fast, but being able to track 4 different objects at one time and what speed you can go at. So we know what you're able to do with kind of your peripheral vision and tracking things, which helps out with vision on the ice. So we even do it for sports performance.
One of the things I've helped, the clinic has done the baseline testing for some of the hockey teams local to our area. So we've had all these hockey players coming in, and they've asked me to help out doing some of these baseline concussion tests. So I've done the one where they had to read the letters. Yes, the King-Devick. The letters went in kind of squiggly lines, and they had to hold it and kind of look at it and read it. And I'll tell you what, like, I think it is good to have, because there's some kids who were reading it, and even adults, right, that were reading it, and they'd be like A, E, F, C, T, B, and they were going slow, and then you'd have A, E, F, T, C, B, some that went really fast. So, I mean, if I would have not had that baseline for the first kid, say, and I'm like, ooh, he was reading really slow, I'd probably check him off and say, no, he can't return to play, but that's his normal, right? So I do think it is good to have a normal before you come in for the concussion. And then one of the questions a lot of my clients have asked me when I'm talking to them about it is they're like, well, I've already had one concussion, so I probably can't have that initial baseline. But you can, right? Yeah. It's your baseline at that point before your next concussion. Hopefully you don't get one, but like I said, in our sport, it might be inevitable that you're going to fall again. And then the other thing I want to touch upon is, I know you mentioned trainers, like it's nice for the...
But I just want to say, one with even younger kids are like, well, they changes so often. Yes, they kind of recommend every 6 months, but usually we're just doing it a year. That's usually how we're evaluating the smaller kids, because sometimes their baseline gets better as the year kind of goes on, because they're still developing their brain and the pathways that they're doing. And just one thing, I had kids come in before, like they might get hurt just before playoffs. And I know that's the crunch time and everybody wants to play, but without a baseline test, and you having certain symptoms that come right after a hit or whatever, it's very hard for me to say, yes, go and play, because the drawbacks of if another concussion happens close together are, pretty substantial to affect a person's life, possibly going further on and in the future. I had one kid actually from the Canada Lasers who had come in, and I had a baseline test So I was able to run him through all the VOMs, the eye tracking, his exertion test, how hard he could work with the heart rate, and evaluate him. And I was able to basically give him the go ahead to play that day. Because I said, I think you're pretty good. You're almost your baselines anyway, if not maybe a little bit tired from school. And I was able to pass him. Anyone else that came into me without a baseline, and I had any thinking that, you know what, this could be, I'm not passing them. So they got to come in and get these baseline tests, because it's just when it comes critical and push comes to shove, I got to make a proper decision for you going forward, not just because your coach wants you to play, your parents want you to play, and you want to play.
One of the things you mentioned before that I was going to say is that you said trainers sometimes can have some of these quick testing skills. And I think that's great for even like our coaches and our trainers, maybe if they get a little bit more versed in concussions and the baseline. So if you have a baseline, or if they require, I think it would be great if farms who teach require their students to have baseline testing, and then they can, if they have a fall at a horse show, they can maybe run through some of these quick reading tests and stuff to see how they're doing and kind of give them a quick evaluation there. So I know you and I were just chatting before we decided to do this little interview. I asked is it required by Hockey Canada for the junior teams and younger kids to get tested with baseline, because they are pushing it. Like, we are seeing more entire teams in hockey getting baselined, right? I think it'd be great for Equine Canada to push, or even farms, for you guys as individual farms, if we have to start at a smaller level, require it for your team, so your students and your riders at your facilities, to have this done, just to help prevent bigger issues happening. But before we get into that a little bit more, I want to ask a couple more questions. So first things first, what are some of the symptoms if someone does get a concussion? What are they looking at?
Well, there's a lot of different symptoms. Some of the main ones: dizziness, headache, fatigue, nausea. Fogginess is a big one that people maybe not think about going forward. Light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, trouble sleeping, sleeping too much, irritability, mood. That's why it's pretty important to know your players and your kids. So I often ask the parents, is the kid acting kind of normal for his personality? Going forward, there are multiple things too that even go beyond that. The balance problems, the inability to remember things, even speech. Sometimes speech is like, oh, he always has a great articulation with his speech, and now he's fumbling with words. He's having trouble remembering words. The flow of that, when you're switching from right brain to left brain, can be disrupted when you're doing that. So there are quite a bit of different symptoms, but often we ask, okay, well, did you have a big head movement? Did you hit your head? Which isn't necessary. You can get a concussion from just whiplash doing those, but what were the kind of the pre-existing symptoms? Like, did you see stars? Were you dizzy when you first got up? Did you lose consciousness? Which, once again, is not a necessity for concussion, which is a thought of for a lot of people, but I think that's becoming more ancient anyway, and people are understanding you don't have to lose consciousness to actually have these symptoms. And it's not actually an area of severity either. So losing consciousness for a minute or whatever even is not saying that you had a severe concussion. It's actually a preventative thing that the body does so that it minimizes the damage that happens.
Now, you treat a lot of hockey players with concussions, and I know you've seen some of the equestrians that we've sent to the clinic with concussions. Do you find that they're fairly severe when an equestrian comes in with one, or is it still varying? Like, you're going to get mild ones? I
think it has to do too with how many you've had. They do start piling up on each other. If you've had one in the past, usually you're compromised and the next one's worse with the same type of symptoms or new symptoms with accompanying of the other symptoms as well. The problem with the equestrians is they fall from higher heights, and it's usually abrupt. They don't know what's actually happening because these people are trained to stay on their horse. They know how to do things. They know how to avoid injury as best they can. But falling from that speed and that height is quite a bit of strain on the head or the body when you're trying to resist yourself from getting stepped on or getting out of the way and those types of things.
Now, most of us, and I say this lightly because I myself grew up in the States, and I rarely wore a helmet. Unfortunately, when I did ride or when I practiced, it wasn't even thought of. I do now. But will a helmet protect me from getting a concussion?
It's not going to protect you because obviously your brain is still in a gel and water around it, so it can still bounce around in the skull and cause damage that way. I do think equestrian helmets are better than a lot of other athletic sports helmets because, you know, in hockey and football, they have a hard shell, and that hard shell is to protect them from, you know, fractures of the skull and bleeding of the skull. Where the equestrians, I think their helmets are more designed to break apart. That's really what it should do, right? It's dispersing all the forces. You know, mostly we really recommend having a helmet that actually attaches more to the collarbone here, so that when you get hit, the forces go down through the body and rather than going into the head. But how do you keep the head stable and things? So it's really hard to make a helmet that can resist those types of forces. Because even rotation-wise, which is usually one of the worst concussions, is when you get hit from the side and your head turns. If you watch the Sidney Crosby one that he got hit with Washington, he had 2 concussions close together, but that second one, it's a rotational one. And when you get rotational, the stretching of the neurons and the axons in the brain are stretched to their end limits usually, or beyond that. So it's causing a lot of damage to those pathways. And that's where I see a lot more of the severe concussions when you're hit that way.
So when we hit the ground, obviously, or when we're thrown, I'm sure there is quite a bit of rotation when we do hit the ground and when we fall, because we're not staying very static. But are there exercises that you tend to give people to help strengthen their neck, their head, anything like that?
Well, yeah, then that touches on the baseline too, right? If I'm going through some of the exercise, like the eye tracking, I see you're not very good at that one. I'll even tell them, saying, go practice this at home, or maybe you want to do the neuro tracker with us just to help solidify those pathways. Also, neck strengthening, you can't really not do those if you want to prevent these types of things, because if I can resist the forces, so instead of going like this, if I can go smaller with the resistance because my neck is prepared to make those reaction from a hit or when I'm falling, you're going to stop the amount of shake in through the head. So we do isometrics usually, and then we'll progress to forward movement with weight. Like we can put a head harness on there with a kettlebell on there as well. And then there's different progressions from doing almost like a handstand or a pike position where you're rolling the head forward and back and in different positions, just so that you're putting pressure on it and you're creating tension through the neck. So we do those. And there's even another exercise we do called CARS, controlled articular rotations, which is putting tension at end ranges, because that's usually where we're the weakest, because we don't train at end ranges, we all train at mid ranges. So if we're training at mid ranges, we're actually doing well at our best part, but when we get overstretched, that's when we don't have the strength to overcome the forces that are pulling us in certain directions.
Okay, so I don't want to make this interview too long, but I know with a lot of those exercises, maybe I can convince him to demonstrate some of them for some later videos. So we're going to wrap this up today, but...
I was hoping tomorrow.
Well, anyway, so like I said, we're going to wrap this up for my equestrians, for my clients, for my friends out there, for those of you who own a farm and you're a coach. Really think about getting your students, I know I've said this many times, but get your students to think about a baseline testing. The nice thing is I always tell them, you guys can come to the clinic and get it done. We have offered discounts in the past for group baseline testing, but you can have them done. The nice thing is if you have a concussion, if you don't want to come back to the clinic to have your treatments, those baseline testings follow you everywhere you go, right? So anybody who treats concussions know that they can probably pull up that baseline testing. So that's one nice thing about the test. But it is nice to have. It's just there to help you hopefully recover and get back to riding sooner in your recovery. Take it from someone who has had a lot of concussions in the past, and I still suffer from a lot of issues from my past concussions, that it is an important thing to do. I know as equestrians, we tend to say, I'll do it later. I got other stuff I have to do. I can still ride. I don't need it. It is important. Your health is important just as much as your horse's, okay? So have a great night. Thanks for joining us. Thank you for living with me and having to do the interview.
Don't forget to subscribe, follow us, like us, especially if you saw it was interesting, share it with a friend, right? ProAction Sports Injury Clinic, strategic strides.
We're getting really good at this social media on this COVID break. So anyways, have a great night. Bye, guys.
Thank you.